Hi, I'm Mr. Dickerman. I understand you're trying to figure out where you're applying next year. Well, I'm here to help. Why do I do this? Well, the reason I do this is because in all the years I've been teaching at Lowell, I've noticed that students have done some rather strange things in terms of picking where to apply. And there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. And so I'm here to help you focus on the rhyme and the reason. What I've noticed is that, students will go by brand name recognition, names they've heard of, names their parents have heard of, names their parents' friends have heard of, or they follow their peers. You got to go deeper than that. Otherwise, you wind up with bad options at the end if your first options don't come through, or if your first options have major flaws like you can't afford it. So there are essentially two essential questions you need to ask. The first question is, what do I want? And the second question is, what can I have? In terms of what do I want, what type of school? There are lots of different higher ed institutions in the United States. That's one of the pros of the American higher education system. There's small colleges that focus on educating undergraduates, and of course, there are large research universities, and there's a whole lot in between. Small versus large. Which one suits you better? Program or major? Some students say, if I apply to this school, I'll choose this major. And if I go to that school, I'll choose some other major. And the majors can be as different as one school, I'll major in music, and the other, I'll major in cell biology. That's insane. And it's also insane to choose a school because the school has a better reputation, even though it doesn't have the program you're interested in studying. I remember a student some years ago who asked me for a letter of recommendation, and the stuff that he said about, what he thought might help me write that recommendation was that he was interested in civil engineering because his father worked in the construction trades, etc. And when it came time to choose between UC Santa Cruz and Cal Poly Pomona and San Jose State, he went with UC Santa Cruz, which does not have a civil engineering major at all. He chose to major in business economics. Location. Where do you want to spend 4 years of your life? Are you steadfast about staying in California? Do you want to go to the East Coast? Are you totally averse to the Midwest or South? Peer group. Who are you going to be spending those 4 years with? It would be nice if you could find students who are people you can sort of be compatible with. The environment. Again, is it something where you're focused on rah-rah and football and big school and sororities and fraternities and that sort of thing? Or do you want something quieter where it's just you and your peers and out in the, hinterlands where you can focus on your studies? What opportunities do the schools offer in terms of undergraduate research or study abroad or, internships or co-op programs? Now, in terms of what can I have, can you get in? I remember one student who applied to Stanford and Cal Berkeley, and that was it. And so, of course, he spent the first 2 years of his undergraduate life at City College. Can you afford it? I remember one girl who Brown was her dream school. Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And so she applied to Brown early decision, and she got in. And when you apply early decision, you're obliged to go. And about March or April, several months after she was admitted, she starts having a panic attack of whether or not she's going to be able to afford it. You should have thought of that before you applied early decision to Brown. And of course, will your parents allow you to go there? And in many cases, your parents are a pretty big obstacle. So sometimes you might have to work on them, but sometimes you might have to live restricted by their prohibitions, as unfortunate as that is. The what do I want part. There is no single right answer to that. The only wrong answer is I want a brand name diploma from a big name university because that will make my parents proud, get me a good job, and provide the only path to a decent future. I understand a lot of your parents are coming from countries where that really is life. You have to go to the highest ranked university that you can get into. Otherwise, your opportunities are not going to be so great. Here in North America, it really doesn't matter. It's all about what you bring to the table. Studies have shown that, well, let me go to the next slide. I guess not. Okay, studies have shown that people who got into top tier schools, the most selective schools, and went, versus students who got into top tier universities, most selective schools, and didn't go, basically 20 years into their career, it didn't make any difference. Okay, so let's talk about the types of schools that exist in our North American, or specifically our United States higher education landscape. Doctoral universities. Doctoral universities, as their name implies, are schools where the highest degree awarded is the doctorate degree. The PhD, or in the case of the R3s, maybe some professional degrees like dental school, pharmacy school, law school, and perhaps maybe a Doctor of Education, an EdD degree. They tend to be very research-oriented, and the ethos is publish or perish. And of course, the focus of the professor's time is often the grad students, the doctoral students. But of course, since they do the most research, that is where most knowledge is being acquired. Baccalaureate colleges are on the other end of the spectrum. They generally don't have any graduate students. They focus on teaching undergraduates. And so undergraduates are pretty much what's on campus, and they rule the roost. And there may be some research opportunities there that may not be at R1 universities, because at R1 universities or other doctoral schools, it's the grad students who do a lot of the research. Whereas if a professor wants something done at a baccalaureate college, the professor only has undergraduates to turn to because there are no PhD students. Master's colleges and universities, it's kind of a broad catch-all category. It could be schools that are kind of like baccalaureate colleges, except that they offer master's degrees. Or it could be commuter schools like most of the Cal States and the City College of New York system. And then there are schools that specialize, whether it be engineering, health professions, art, music, design, business, faith-related, if you want to become a minister. It's all out there. Where do you want to be? Again, large versus small. Each has its pluses, each has its minuses. At a large school, you're one of many in a crowd. It's easy to get lost. There are a lot of peers to hopefully gravitate toward, but you may have a little trouble finding them. It's a big environment. At a small school, you get more attention from your professors, more access to your professors. At a large school, because there are so many students, there's a wide range of courses, majors, and programs. Whereas at a small school, the selection is very limited. A small school cannot be all things to all people. At a large school, there's a lot of activity. At a small school, there's more of a sense of community. There is no one right answer. What matters to you? Let's talk about the California higher education system. The system of post-baccalaureate or post-high school, post-secondary institutions that are explicitly set up for you, the high school graduates of California. That higher education system is now organized into 3 tiers. The University of California system, the California State University system, and the California Community College system. The University of California system is the state's research universities. By now, all University of California campuses that accept undergraduates are classified by the Carnegie Foundation as R1, very high research activity. Merced has finally made the jump from R2 to R1. As for the other 2 UC's campuses that do not accept undergraduates, those would be UCSF, the medical school, and University of California Law, formerly Hastings College of the Law. Both specialize in health sciences and law, and both only accept graduate students. But basically, the University of California, their mission, when it was first set out, was to be the state's agriculture, mining, and mechanic arts college under the Morrill Act, the Land Grant Act. And then they merged with College of California, which is a private Christian college in Oakland. They were both eyeing the same property, and somebody realized, hey, why don't we just combine forces? We both want the same property, and we'll just form a complete university. And so that's what happened. They merged in 1868 and moved to Berkeley in 1873. And then the other campuses came about over the next century or so. We all know the campuses. Davis, Berkeley, Santa Cruz, Merced, Santa Barbara, Los Angeles, Irvine, San Diego, and Riverside. And then, of course, there's UCSF, which you can't apply to yet, and same with Hastings College of the Law. Again, as R1 universities, as very high activity research universities, all of these schools are globally recognized for research in the various fields, and their professors are recognized as experts in their field. They're mostly offering the same program, but there is a perceptual pecking order. The most selective campuses are thought of as the best, and the less selective campuses are thought of as the worst. And many of you really need to dispense with that attitude because really, you're really not too good for any of them. There is a tendency to poo-poo Santa Cruz, Riverside, and Merced. Don't. Because number one, they really are offering the same thing as Berkeley, San Diego, Santa Barbara, LA, Davis, Irvine. You know, for better or worse, they're all major research universities warehousing their freshman and sophomore students into large lecture hall classes. The English classes are taught by graduate students rather than professors. And then in your junior and senior years, you actually see more of your professors. It's the same at any of them. And of course, you may have to consider Santa Cruz, Riverside, and Merced, as the entire system has more applicants applying and thus are becoming more and more selective. There are 13 factors for evaluating applicants at UC. Most of them can be gleaned from your transcript, your GPA, your course rigor. Has there been an improvement over the last couple of years? But there are certain things that you have to really reveal in your personal insight questions. Things like special talents, exceptional skills, academic accomplishments in light of your life experiences, outstanding work in special projects. Then there's the CSU system. The CSU system is basically the access point for higher education because it's set up to take in the top third of California high school graduates. The CSUs are mostly master's level programs. Master's degree is the highest degree it awards. There are some programs that are considered doctoral universities. San Francisco State, for some strange reason, is considered a doctoral university, R2, I think. And you'll have to go through the Carnegie Foundation definitions to understand why. The main programs that San Francisco State has as doctoral programs is the combined physical therapy program that it has with UCSF, and also a lot of education doctoral programs. The only true PhD granting school among the CSUs is San Diego State. Overall, the CSUs, like the UCs, are comprehensive universities. They offer a wide range of programs. The main exception, of course, is the Cal Maritime Academy up in Vallejo, which basically focuses on the maritime industry. In case you were wondering about the history, most of the CSUs were rooted in the normal school system, the system of colleges aimed at training teachers to teach. Here are the CSU system campuses. Some you've heard of. I'm sure a lot you haven't. Now, CSU admissions are a little bit different from UC admissions. In that UC, they are explicitly admitting statewide. It doesn't matter where in California you live. Basically, if you're applying in Arcata versus applying from Riverside in terms of where you graduate from high school, depending on your course rigor and your GPA and all the other personal attributes, you have just as good a chance as getting into UCSD from either high school. With the CSUs, it's a little bit different because the CSUs have a mission of supporting their communities. And so certain schools in the CSU system will prioritize students applying from that region. I mean, sure, you could go to San Jose State, depending on your grades and what program you're applying to, but there is an extra benefit to having graduated from a high school within Santa Clara County, because that's their priority area. San Francisco State really gave up on any such thing. San Francisco State will give equal weight no matter where in California you apply from. But a lot of the CSUs, like Cal State Northridge, you really have to come from that part of Los Angeles, unless you are significantly above the minimum entrance requirements. So what's the difference between the two senior college systems? Well, UC is set up to take the top 1/8 of California high school graduates, whereas the CSU system is set up to take the top 1/3 of California high school graduates. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you're in the top third, you can go to any CSU you want. I mean, you have to be a bit higher up the totem pole to be able to get into Cal Poly SLO, for example, for engineering, computer science, or business. But in general, if you're the top 1/3 of California high school graduates, there's a place for you in the CSU system. With UC, you pretty much have to be in that top 8th. UC is mostly focused on research. The ethos is publish or perish. You have to be one of the leading researchers in your field in order to stay employed at UC. And it's about training the next level or the next generation of the next researchers, PhD students. The CSUs are mostly focused on undergraduate education, except maybe the handful of master's programs. And of course, at some like San Diego State, they have PhD programs, a handful of them. The tuition at UC is about double what the tuition is at CSU. But the funding is better at UC than it is at CSU. But before some of you dismiss the CSU system out of hand, remember that because UC is about theory, whereas CSU is more about practice, there are certain programs that are predominantly at CSU campuses. And then there are some programs, as you can see on the right, that are only at CSU campuses. You're not going to find early childhood education or graphic design or forensic science or hospitality management or kinesiology or radio and television at any UC. Of course, since a lot of folks think of Cal Poly SLO as, well, almost a UC, you might find some of those programs there. They are in the CSU system. Now, where can you find which school has what programs? Well, this website, transferbound.com, is really good for locating which schools in California in the public education system have which majors or concentrations or anything else that's sort of a sub-major. Okay. Now, the community colleges are two-year colleges that award associate's degrees. There may be a few now that offer some bachelor's degrees, but for the most part, the community colleges essentially do three things. They provide a stepping stone to the senior college system through the Transfer Admission Guarantee Program, or you could just, like for the UCs that don't participate in TAG, like Berkeley, LA, and San Diego, you could still apply to transfer there. But if you apply to Santa Cruz or Irvine or Davis or any of the others, or most of the CSUs, if you just fill out all these check boxes, take all the right courses, you can get into whatever UC or CSU within limits that you choose. Okay. Of course, the community colleges also offer vocational ed, and they offer just community-based education, people in the community who just want to take a course or two or several. So here's the hierarchy. The UCs are set up to take the top 1/8 of high school graduates. The CSUs are set up to take the top 1/3 of high school graduates. And the California community colleges are set up to take everyone. Now, there is life and college beyond the California public education system. But the question you need to answer is, why are you considering schools outside the California public higher ed system? Now, I would like to encourage you to not apply to the big names, because unless you're a real star student of low income and low wealth background, you're going to be paying a fortune. And that's assuming you even get in. Most of the time, you're just wasting your application fee and the time putting in answering all their questions. So, where should you look? Or should you even bother? Well, the thing is, you should have a reason. Let me go back a couple of slides. There are good reasons you may want to look outside the California higher education system, but you really do need to answer the question, why? Is it that prestige will help you later in life? Well, as I said earlier, and this is a slide I was looking for, there are studies that show that if your talent level is consistent with someone who would have been admitted to an Ivy League school or their peers, 20 years into your career, it really didn't matter if you chose to go there or not. And if you want a good education, you could pretty much find one in a lot of different places at a lot of different schools. Now, what options make sense for which students? Well, your main options are private colleges and universities or out-of-state publics or out-of-the-country publics. Basically, if you have a lot of money, sure, it makes sense to apply to the most expensive schools. Your family can afford it. Or, on the other end, it makes sense if you have very little money. If you are a top-tier student who comes from a low-income, low-wealth background, and if a school will admit you and support you, then that often turns out to be a pretty good deal. Again, not every school can afford to carry you, but if you can get into one of the ones that can, great. Of course, if you go to a private school, especially the ones with more resources, you'll see lower student-faculty ratios. I remember one student who went to Occidental College and was just amazed that his introductory physics class had 9 students in it. And there was another section of that same introductory physics course. You go to a major research university, and that course may have about 200 of your closest friends. And of course, at some of the more wealthy private institutions, there's a lot more creature comforts and more pampering. And, some schools, they just absolutely will not fail you. And you, because you're paying so much money, well, of course you could call your professor at 2 in the morning. Now, for students looking out of state and internationally for public institutions, well, you can afford it, maybe, if you're middle class, if you don't apply to the more expensive ones like Michigan. And again, if you apply to a school where you can attract a lot of merit aid. And if you're afraid you can't get into a UC, well, maybe looking at some other states' R1 schools or maybe some other types of schools might make sense, especially if they're a school that offers a lot of merit aid. There is the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program. That's a series of schools that'll give you a discount to students coming from neighboring states. So at some schools, not all, not every school in these states participates in WUI. But if you're looking at University of Nevada or University of Utah or Montana or New Mexico Tech or Northern Arizona or Hawaii, you can pay 1.5 times the tuition as state residents pay. Sometimes that ends up being a real good deal. But again, you have to figure out which schools that participate in WUI are schools that you'd want to apply to. If you want to know a little something about how much a school is going to cost you, check out each school's net price calculator. Basically, it's something that's required of all schools that accept federal money, i.e. Pell Grants, for example. And if you plug in your financial numbers And if you plug in your academic numbers at some of the schools that offer merit aid, you can get a pretty good idea of how much you might pay, at least in your first year. Of course, some schools don't exactly have the best net price calculators. Like if it's a state school and they don't ask you what state you are applying from, not just are you coming from out of state, but if it's a school that is a WUI school and they don't ask you which state you're applying from, then it's not going to give you the best estimate, but at least it's something. General rule, the more questions a net price calculator asks, the more accurate its prediction would be. Now, in order to find a school outside the CSU or UC system, basically, you might want to look at some schools in less popular regions. I understand that the Midwest and the South may not be your cup of tea, but you could find some good schools and some good deals there. And of course, being willing to look at schools you've never heard of. There really are some hidden gems out there. All you have to do is look for them to find them. One website that still exists, hopefully, is College Navigator. It's from the Department of Education. And you may not be able to, I would suggest doing a Google search because the URL is a little hard to memorize. It's just look up College Navigator. Big Future is from the College Board, the same evil empire that gives you the AP exams and the SATs. This is how the site used to look a few years ago. I haven't updated it. They've changed a few things, but it's still a very useful site. Which is more useful? Well, it depends on what you want to search for. College Navigator is better if you want to search for SAT and ACT scores, or the acceptance rates, or the undergraduate enrollment, how many students are there. Big Future pretty much divides everything into small, medium, and large. That's not terribly helpful. But Big Future is more useful if you're trying to figure out how much need a school can meet, if you're trying to search by residential life and offerings, and if you search by diversity, if that's important to you. But you could find a lot more information other than what you would search for. For instance, College Navigator, you could look at percentage of students receiving Pell Grants, average net price, graduation rates, number of degrees awarded in each major, and the cohort default rates on student loans. With Big Future, you could look at average percentage of financial need met, financial aid distribution, GPAs of incoming freshman students, unique features, and application deadlines, which are usually correct. If you at least want to know what's available up from our neighbor to the north, formerly our friendly neighbors up there, you could look at this site at least to find out which schools have what programs, universitystudy.ca. And if you want to know more about Canadian universities, a publication called Maclean's has that on their website, including financial information, how well endowed, what's the library, how many volumes, and so forth and so on, and also what kind of grade point average does it take to get into the various schools. Canadian universities basically are admitting by grade point average and strength of program. And so, you don't have to fill out all the essays and such. But yes, and the minimum entering grades, by the way, all that stuff is based on a scale of 100 rather than 4.0. Now, you're looking for a good school. What is a good school? Well, you could really only determine if a school is good for you. And it involves doing a lot of research, putting clues together, and even then, you don't really know until you get there. Some numbers might tell you, but maybe not. Acceptance rates can be deceiving. Sure, you assume that if a school is popular, there must be a reason for it. But it also, you have to take into account that it's a different set of applicants applying to each school. You might want to look at their test scores numbers if students are still submitting test scores, or graduation rates. But graduation rates can be tricky. Sure, strong schools tend to admit stronger students. Stronger students can graduate on time. But there are some schools, like maybe you're looking at a school in Utah. What might drive down the 4-year graduation rate in Utah? Well, how about all those young men who go off on mission? Or Northeastern University doesn't have any kind of a 4-year graduation rate because you're all supposed to go away for a year and do some sort of co-op program. So, and of course, there are some schools that are just weed out schools. They're good, but they have high acceptance rates, but high standards as well. If you want to get some student opinion, here are some websites you can look up. And also you could look at the guides like Fisk and Princeton Review, and I think there are some others. But even if a school is good, does that mean they're good for what you want? Well, you could look at ratemyprofessors.com. I mean, sure, you think of that site as where students complain, but a lot of students will say some very insightful things too. So there might be something useful. Check it out. Rankings, they can be deceiving. It depends on if your priorities match their priorities. U.S. News, a lot of their basis for rankings favor schools that cater to families with money. Is that what's important to you? Other rankings say, oh, well, this school has a large percentage of international faculty. Well, that means that they have a large draw. Does that mean you could understand those professors? Basically, rankings might serve a purpose. That purpose is it might basically clue you into a school that you may never have heard of, but maybe you should check out. But if you're basically saying, this is a school I have to go to because it's ranked 25th instead of 40th, well, that's not a good use of all these rankings. So, what's important? Well, basically develop a sense of what you want and try to find out where you can find it. Make sure that you have a realistic sense of how admissions offices will see you. If you're not somebody who is class president and you're not somebody who is like volunteering to deliver food to Africa or something like that, or starting a business, which of course, if daddy could fund your business, then chances are you're not going to get into one of the top tier schools. And you don't need to. If it's about getting an education, you don't need to go for the prestige. And then develop a reasonable list of schools to apply to. Yeah, sure, you could apply to a few reaches, but focus on a range of schools that are consistent with basically students who have your grade point average. And make sure you focus on your safety schools. Don't let that be an afterthought. Sure, you can apply to a school that has an 80% acceptance rate, but are you going, a lot of students might apply to a school and then say, well, I got in there, but I don't really want to go there. I'll just go to City. Well, then why did you apply there? So be intentional. There are good schools with high acceptance rates that you know you could get into and that you'd actually enjoy being there. And then if you got rejected by everybody, well, there are schools that will accept very late applications. Not in California so much, but elsewhere. Be on the lookout if you absolutely have to. Well, I hope that you got something out of that. And if you have any questions, you could email me at dickermans@sfusd.edu.